Last time, I went through some examples of using EQ on a few individual instruments. But those tracks will eventually be combined in the mix, and that brings up another important consideration when it comes to using EQ. It's fine to solo individual instruments and vocal tracks and EQ them until they sound good. That's how many people start off a mix. But ultimately, you won't be done EQing things until you hear how all the tracks sound together. And inevitably, when instruments combine, the harmonics and overtones from one will interfere with those in another, changing the tone when they're heard in combination as opposed to when they're soloed, or heard in isolation. This acoustic phenomenon is called masking. Some harmonics and overtones of some sounds will be masked or made inaudible by louder harmonics and overtones and other sounds at nearby frequencies. As a result, the tone of these masked instruments changes when they're heard in the mix, where masking is occurring, making it necessary to revisit EQ settings dialed up while the tracks were heard in isolation. Mixing sounds together changes their apparent tonal qualities when they're heard together, and when you're EQing tracks for a mix, you have to take this into account. The strumming acoustic guitar I mentioned last time is a good illustration, cutting the low end more when the guitar is used in a busy mix so it won't mask other instruments. Many instruments, especially ones with a lot of mid-range energy, need to be EQ'd differently, sometimes more aggressively, when they're being combined in a busy mix. The usual routine is a constant back and forth between EQing each track for a good tone soloed and then tweaking it in context, with all tracks playing, to settle on final EQ settings that'll work in the mix as a whole. Sometimes a track needs aggressive EQ, like, say, a big mid-range cut, to blend into a mix without overpowering other tracks. But if that instrument then has a solo passage, it might sound too thin or hollow on its own. It's not uncommon to use different EQ settings on that instrument in different parts of the song, either by dividing the musical part into two tracks, or by recording changes to the EQ settings with the DAW's automation. Here are some examples of tracks that were EQ'd to work in the mix. Notice the EQ on these drums. The snare in particular has a deep, broad cut to keep its strong mid-range energy from sticking out too much in the blend. The acoustic guitar has had the low-end cut, as I described, leaving room for the electric piano and guitar chords to come through clearly. Another approach some people like to use is to stagger the frequency ranges they choose for different tracks to avoid too much of a buildup in the mix at particular frequency ranges. For example, if there are several electric guitar tracks that all need a little presence boost in the upper mids, you might choose to boost each one at a different frequency and cut the others at those same frequencies. So if one guitar is given a boost at around 2K, another one might be boosted at 4K and cut slightly at 2K. The idea is to carve a frequency range out of the mix for each instrument, keeping them from stepping on each other, or masking each other, and allowing them all to be heard more clearly. Here are a couple of tracks where this has been done. The EQ on the electric piano has big broad boosts at 3K and 100 Hz, and a big cut at 750 Hz. The electric guitar, panned opposite, has also got a big boost, but at a higher frequency around 6K, and a broad cut centered around 200 Hz. Listen to the piano and guitar together with these EQs. Even though both have a boost in the upper mids and a cut in the lower mids, the boosts are centered at different frequencies, 3 kHz versus 6 kHz, an octave apart. The low-mid cuts are also at different frequencies, 200 Hz versus 750 Hz. This allows each track to carve out its own space in the mix from a tonal standpoint. The guitar has energy at 700 to 800 Hz, while the piano is subdued in that range. The piano has energy at 100 to 200 Hz, while the guitar is rolled off there. They stay out of each other's way, and the resulting blend has good clarity. Here's a bit of the overall mix, without and then with EQ applied. Now, these are all just general suggestions, but all of these techniques are typically employed when working with EQ. The key is to get to know the quality of the different frequency ranges and train yourself to hear what's going on in the mix, so you can quickly and efficiently dial up the best EQ setting in each different situation. And on that little bit of sage advice, I'm going to move on to the other most widely used effects, dynamics, especially compression.